Here is the simplest way to sew a welt pocket with a flap. It is faced with self fabric and you can use either lining or stronger pocket fabric for the pocket bag. So this is what it looks like from the wrong side. The first task is to make the flap. I have the flap and lining cut out. This is the welt piece with the welt position marked. This is the facing that will show when you lift the flap. Here's the top part of the pocket bag and the undersection. The undersection is slightly shorter. This is the lower section of the side front of my frock coat pattern number 657. I have removed the top half for this demo. The welt position is marked. I will be transferring these markings to the interfacing. The flaps are interfaced and they will be lined. When you come to stitch them together, either make the lining a little smaller or as you stitch, let a little bit of lining show, stretching the lining a little. You will end up with the lining just slightly smaller to keep it from showing when it is turned through. This is a good trick for collars and cuffs as well. So for beginners, it is always best to pin and hand baste before you machine. You can clearly see the lining extends, which makes the main fabric pucker a little, and that is what you want. At the machine, to stitch around the curved corners, hold the fabric firmly and sew slowly. I'm trimming off most of the seam allowance. To get a nice smooth curve, clip into the seam allowance like so. And remove a little more fabric around the curve. Turn through and push out the curve as you press, keeping the lining on the inside. After pressing, you will have a good finish. Here are the two side front pieces interfaced. I have marked the position of the welt. Transfer the markings accurately from the pattern . The same with the welt pieces. They have also been interfaced and need to be marked with the welt position. Draw in the stitching line if you need to. The width must be a consistent 1 centimetre or 3/8 of an inch. and the ends must be square. This is very important. This must be a true rectangle. This is where the stitching will start and end. Pin the welt pieces in place, checking that you have matched up the markings. Then stitch along the parallel lines. Do not stitch the ends. So stitching from the marks, I need to insert the needle carefully. An embroidery foot is quite useful for this, as you can see more clearly the needle entry point. Back stitching to start and finish is important, as you don't want this stitching to come undone. Keep the stitching straight and again backstitch at the end. Stitch the second line in the same way. Next, cut the welt pieces in half between the stitching. Then cut the main fabric . But stop 1.5 centimetres or half an inch before the start of the stitching. Carefully snip from this point right up to the start of the stitching. And the same with the other end. Again, accuracy is so important. Turn the welt pieces through. These pieces will be folded to make the welt opening. Turning over, the aim is to get these folds to meet equally in the middle. These narrow seams need to be pressed open. Make sure you have the opposite welt out of the way before you press open the seam. And again on the opposite side. Place like so, and you can more easily press the fold. Measure the width 0.5 centimetres or 3/16 of an inch. And again for the other side. I will be stitching along here to seal the welt in position. And these little ends will need to be stitched down. Looking good so far. Here we can choose to either stitch along here in the ditch or seal the welt by going underneath and stitching along here, which is often neater. Now for the flaps. Select the correct flap. It should fit snugly into the slit. Stitching here fixes the flap. Use the pattern to check position. The flap stitching line lines up with the welt stitching line, not the fold. The top welt and the flap are sealed in position by stitching along here. So at the machine, fix those little ends in position with a few back and forward stitches. And the same with the other side. Next, I will seal the lower welt by stitching down the narrow seam allowance. Good. Now to secure the top part of the welt and the flap. I've slipped the pocket flap into the welt opening and checked the position with the pattern. Down a wee bit. Hold everything firmly in place. This is the welt fabric, and underneath that is the flap seam allowance. Stitch next to the other line of stitching as close as you can. It's looking nice. As I said before, you can stitch in the ditch, which works well with woolens, where the stitches are lost in the pile. But for finer fabrics, stitching underneath is better. This is what we have so far. Now for the pocket bag. This is the top pocket bag, which will be joined to the welt. So matching the single notches, join right sides together. Then join the pocket facing to the under pocket bag. Match the double notches. To complete the pocket bag, I will stitch all the way around. You can leave the raw edges as the jacket in this case is lined, or you can zigzag or overlock for a neater finish. Pin and baste ready for stitching. This is an easy process and doesn't have to be that accurate. Continue across the top. You can go around again. It rather depends on how much wear your pocket is going to get. The pocket is just about finished. The last thing to do is to add bar tacks each end. Just a narrow zigzag with a short stitch length is fine, or if your machine has the feature, you may like to use the bar tack stitch. So the pocket is faced with self fabric. The underside doesn't have to be that neat if the garment is to be lined. The welt folds can be narrower if you prefer that look. I hope you have found this useful. Download patterns from AngelaKane.com. All my sewing tutorials are free, and that includes my in-depth pattern drafting lessons. Thank you very much for watching this video.